Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it about 2 minutes here while people join. All right, let's launch. Looks like our people joining has slowed down a little bit, so we'll get going here. Um, Welcome everybody to our annual Quality Communities Academy. We hold this every year to share some resources that we hope will be helpful to people as they think about how to plan their communities, how to keep Utah a great place to live. And my name's Ari Bruning. I'm the president and CEO of Envision Utah, and I want to thank, first of all, our sponsor for this event, Chevron. Thank them very much. Without them, this couldn't happen. And uh, We'll give you a little bit of a sense of where we're headed today. So we're going to talk about three different things today, and we have resources for each of them. So first of all, we're going to talk about our Creating Communities guide that we put together with a lot of help from others, which is a guide to creating walkable centers. So if you're thinking about a mixed use center or something in your community, that'll hopefully be a helpful guide to you. And then second, we're going to talk about housing and some strategies potentially for cities to help keep housing more affordable. And we have a guide for that as well. And then third, we're going to talk about water. And we recently completed a water values study at Envision Utah, and we'll be sharing some findings from that. So as we go along, if you have questions, please put them in the Zoom question and answer feature. So you can just type those in, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session, and I'll read your questions, and our panelists will answer them. So just type them in as we go. And um, I want to introduce our speakers. So uh, our first speaker is going to be Ryan Beck, who's the VP of Planning at Envision Utah, and he will be talking about centers. And then Francis Lilly, who is the Mill Creek Planning and Zoning Director, will be giving us a case study of a center in Mill Creek. And then after him, Alyssa Gamble who is the Moderate Income Housing Program Manager at the Department of Workforce Services, will be talking a bit about moderate income housing. And then after her, Cody Lutz, who's the Planning Project Manager at Envision Utah, will be talking about that water values study. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Beck.
All right. Thank you, Ari. Just let me get. All right. I'm all set. Thank you. Well, thanks, Ari, for the introduction and getting us started. And honestly, thank you for everyone who's spending a few bit of their time this afternoon joining me and the rest of the crew here as we walk you through. Well, we'll start off with a resource here that Ari mentioned, Creating Communities, a guide to walkable centers. We are really glad you're here, and we were hoping that you will use this guide as a tool to help you think about and learn more and uh, and and ultimately create your own centers as a strategy for accommodating growth while maintaining this high quality of life that we've come to know and love in Utah. So my presentation, we have this resource and we'll send out all the materials afterwards, but this my presentation follows the resource and the guide. So yeah, please follow along and look at it afterwards. But really how we grow matters. We're looking at about 3.4 million Utahns statewide in about 2023, 2024, looking to, not quite double that, but add millions of Utahns by 2050, 2060. And with all the opportunity that comes with growth, also comes quite a few challenges. Think water, think traffic, think air quality, think sewer, think housing. Lots of challenges that come with that. And we feel like centers are a great way to help us grow and be a tool to help absorb that population I just showed you. So these centers are a Utah tradition. I pulled some historic photos. We've got on the left there, we've got Salt Lake City in about 1909. On the right, we've got Park City. Early centers or main streets or what you want to call them. The thing about these centers and that they were built, notice in this left-hand picture, 1909, I looked at that pretty closely and I couldn't find a single automobile in there. So these places were built at a walkable scale. So that's an important component of a center. So let's jump right in. What is a center? Well, it's a walkable mixed-use location in your city or region or neighborhood that provides amenity and services. But these centers share three components. They're a mix of uses. Now, when I say a mix of uses, it doesn't necessarily have to be vertical. It can be horizontal, but the uses, land uses, should be in close proximity to each other. These centers have access to regional transportation, and like I mentioned a couple of times already, they're walkable in design. Now, I don't know where you're joining us from here in Utah, but the good news is that there is a center for just about every community. Centers come in different scales. I've got a neighborhood. We've got a rendition of a neighborhood center there. That could be, we could use a church or even a school as a centering device for at that scale. But we also have city centers, urban centers, and metropolitan centers. Now, when I say metropolitan centers, think downtown Salt Lake, downtown Provo, downtown Ogden. So, and I know we've talked about Ted Knowlton always said location matters, and he's right. Location is important. Centers are each individual center is awesome and excellent, provides a lot of benefits to the community on its own. But when we connect these centers as part of a network with other centers, it just creates I don't know what you want to say. Maybe it supersizes the benefits, but it really adds to a region so you can access lots of employment opportunities, education opportunities, housing opportunities, the whole gamut there. So you may be asking what's in a center, and I mentioned mixed uses, but a good center, well-designed center, has multiple uses. Think housing, think retail, think office space, think public spaces, or other civic uses. I've got a picture here of Richfield, Utah, great Main Street type of center there. You know where the center of Richfield is. And just a note here that what centers are not. They're not strip malls, and they tend to not be auto-oriented in design. Doesn't mean automobiles don't have a place there, just they're not designed around the automobile. I mentioned housing. I think every single community I know in Utah we're many housing units short. And I really feel like housing is key in centers. It's key to make them healthy. It's a great opportunity to increase our housing supply of this missing middle or attainable housing. Location matters. Where we put our housing in our community is incredibly important. And centers tend to have access to transportation. So when you think about housing plus transportation costs, there really is another benefit there. So centers include usable public space. This is a great example, maybe in a more downtown area. But I'm going to stop here and talk about this one for a second. So this is University Place in Orem, and I really like this example. So many of you know the story here. It was called the University Mall for a long time. It's now called the University Place, but they've added housing and a whole lot of other amenities. And I'm going to call this public space out because it's got water features. It has benches. It has shaded picnic tables. It has good lighting for after when the sun goes down. It just, for the housing and the employees that work here, it's just a nice space that they can relax or spend some time at. So we know that retail has changed in our lifetime over the last 10 or 15 years. Retail has taken, made a really big change. And today's shoppers we know they're spending less on goods. They're ordering more of those things, uh, but they're spending more on things like dining out, concerts, festivals, experiences. So as you're designing your center, think about how retail has changed over the years, and apply that knowledge. So the best centers really reflect the unique location that they're at. This is an awesome example in Park City. Um, this center, their main street, it just blends right into the surrounding community, and it's almost like you don't know where the center ends, and the other land uses begin. So a great example there. And I pulled this picture of community examples of community culture that could be represented in a center, and I labeled them. But honestly, I think if I pulled the Moab and the Vernal and the St. George label off, you could probably all guess where they were, because they're doing their built environment is very representative of their community culture. So I wanted to put those examples up as good examples of community culture. So let's shift to moving to and through centers. Centers are all not just about the land use, but also about the regional transportation connections. The best centers are located near public transportation, high capacity public transportation. I'm showing an awesome example here in South Jordan at Daybreak of the tracks there. But these walkable environments just go hand in hand with public transportation. So an incredibly important component there. Another important component is traffic calming strategies. There's a few examples here of larger medians, of the roundabouts or traffic circles, one-way couplet, extended curbs. All of these calming strategies are an effort to slow down cars. With that comes a reduction of noise to make them a little bit more pleasant to walk. So slowing down the traffic is a great strategy that you should apply to your center. I want to look at the street connectivity. These two maps, I guess, that we have on the screen here. On the left-hand side, we have a connected street grid, and you can really, there's a lot of options, a lot of ways to get around. There's direct routes for walking and biking. Now, conversely, let's compare this to a more traditional suburb that I'm showing on the right side. And, there's less ways to get around. And then we are forcing most of the traffic out onto these higher speed roads, either collectors or arterial roads. So less ways to get around, less walkable. So this connected street grid is an incredibly important component of a center. So I know what you're saying. I just showed this map of the suburbs. You're like, well, we've already built out that area when we don't have street connectivity. What I would say is, if it's not possible, maybe if a road's not possible, maybe there are some other options for adding either pedestrian or bike connections to the existing street network there. So I will mention, I won't go too much into depth about this, but there is a great resource out there called the Utah Street Connectivity Guide. Definitely check it out when you're thinking about your connectivity there. So complete streets. We've often, since about the 1950s, we built our streets to really serve mostly the needs of automobiles. But this concept of complete streets is awesome. It serves cars, bicyclists, and pedestrians. And some of the elements there are street crossings, well-marked crosswalks, narrower driving lanes, slower posted speeds, on-street parking, park strips, furniture, and other artwork to help create a sense of place and make it a more inviting environment. So another important component of a center. Now, parking is a huge question, and I'm not. I know parking is essential for convenient auto access in your center, and I'm not going to argue with that, because you're absolutely right. But and I titled the slide "Thoughtful Parking" for a reason. We know that these large surface parking lots detract from the walkability of your center. So keep in mind a few things. The ITE recommendations are often high, so examine those closely when you're implementing your center. And then when you think about parking, the parking should hopefully enhance the connectivity, convenience, and walkability. So just here's some good strategies to help with your parking. On the right side, I've got a shared parking structure or reservoir. This is in Park City. They share this with this parking structure with not only City Hall but also Main Street, that utilizes it on the weekends when the City Hall is not as busy. And on the left side, centralized parking. This one's at the Gateway. It's an awesome example. You can lower the parking requirement in the surrounding areas, so it really helps there. And I'll also point out that it is a parking garage, but this is a beautiful example. It doesn't necessarily have to be just a gray concrete structure. There's a good example to do some artwork there. So a few more examples of improved parking designs. I pulled this example at 9th and 9th of on-street parking. This one upper right here at Holiday Village, we've got showing the parking behind. And then most of us have used this one in Lower Center at Trolley Square. We probably parked across the street and used the pedestrian bridge, so we don't have to cross with the traffic there at grade. So some good parking designs and some good food for thought as you think about your own parking in your center. So there's lots of benefits when we build a center. And a network of centers helps Utahns, helps us with our housing. It helps us with the access to employment. It helps us to access to recreation areas, education, and healthcare. So lots of benefits. Other benefits include meeting our housing needs. Since about 2014, it's been about 50-50, single family versus multifamily housing product that we've been building. So, centers are a great place to put these multifamily units. It's a great place, especially if they're served by public transportation. So Cody in our office has done a little bit of modeling about the amount of land developed and the total amount of land consumed. So this baseline scenario that we're showing, that's a very traditional way to build. Think suburbs and that nature of a build out. But the vision scenario there is a centers based vision, and you can see how much land it saves. So if things like agriculture land or other open spaces are important to you, centers are a great strategies to help maintain that. And also, another benefit, there's incredible health benefits of living in walkable communities. If you're walking every day, or this is suggesting 30 minutes, but you reduce the risk of heart attack, fractures, certain kinds of cancers, depression, dementia, diabetes. So lots of health benefits to these land use patterns that would benefit all of society. So keep that in mind. All right, I'm just going to finish up my last section here with a little bit. Hopefully, you're thinking about planning your center. Hopefully, I've been persuasive and you're thinking about that. But it's incredibly important. All of these communities in Utah are very unique, and they almost all have their own character. And it would be a shame if we lost that character. So centers should be unique to the local community. They should be, have the vision of the locals in mind, and ultimately the process of implementing this centers must be the community's own vision and own process, so it results in a center that's theirs and that reflects them and their community. So I love this example I've got on the screen. This is West Valley City Fairborn Station. You're looking at an aerial of I think it was called the West Valley Mall, but you can see the parking situation. Lots of surface parking, not at capacity at all. Pretty a lot of empty spaces there. But the public sector can come in, and this is exactly what happened at Fairborn Station. They came in and they acquired and aggregated a lot of the properties across the road there. They reduced some of the parking requirements. You can see some of the mall was infilled with restaurants, and they were able to do that by reducing the parking requirements. They improved the walkability. There's examples, just right there by City Hall of some of the walking improvements they made. They put in flexible zoning, and they also added civic uses and open spaces that you can see too. help it be more interesting for those who live in the area. So, an excellent example of a retrofit that happened in West Valley City. And this is just some eye candy here of Holiday, Utah. You know, on the left, I've got the 2002 before picture. On the right, I've got the 2019 after picture. You know, just a place that I would want to walk, I would want to visit. So, you know, I would be proud to call that part of my community or call that home. So, you know, the thing about centers, and you need to really plan for evolution and development because we all know building these centers can take many years, and we also know the future is tough to predict. So um, it's important that you have a clear vision for the future, but also important that you allow flexibility to changing circumstance such as the market. So let me talk a little bit about that. Some of those flexibility opportunities. A form-based code. It's a great way to be to have your code be more flexible in certain areas. You know, that's a little bit more form-based rather than use-based. I talked a little bit about the street grid, but I would, you know, say that that connected street grid is just incredibly important to support a lot of different, a variety of development types that tend to change over time. So that's important. Um, I'm going to call out flexible first floors. What we hear from builders and developers all the time is they say, you know, it's really tough to lease out these first floors, and I concur, and I would say, well, maybe there's a strategy there that the ground floors can be adaptable from housing to commercial space, you know, based on the economic reality of the area, but you know, build those first floors to be adaptable to either use, and so a lot more. I'm looking at my time. You know, I'm just going to call out that in the guide. Hopefully, you page through it and look through it, and we have a lot of metrics to help you plan. Whether it's transportation, housing, you know, economics, or the sense of place. Lots of metrics that you can, you know, kind of use as judgment for what you're building and how well it's coming along. So with that, I think we've got Francis Lilly from Mill Creek to up next to tell us what's going on with Mill Creek and Mill Creek Commons. So Frank, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it off.
All right. Well, thank you. How do I share my screen? I'm not usually a Zoomer, so let's see.
There should be in the middle of the bottom of your screen, there should be a green button that says
Big,
share.
the big green button, of course. It's been staring at me. It's been staring at me this whole time. Okay. Good. Can you all see my screen?
We can see your screen. It looks to be in slide sorter mode.
Oh, well, I want to fix that. Just a second. Well, I don't know why it's pushing me out of this. Hang on just a second. I'm so sorry, folks.
Not a problem at all, Frank. We've all been here.
I'm going to try this again. Is that better?
That looks great.
Okay. So here in Mill Creek, we starting in 2020, we worked on a plan to implement a center on 33rd South between Highland Drive and 1300 East, and we did this through we actually utilized a Wasatch Choice. I'm sorry, a series of transportation land use connection grants from the Wasatch Front Regional Council. Here's the problem set that we encountered in 2018 when we really began to formalize our city planning process, we encountered this situation where the area between 33rd South and Highland Drive, 33rd South and the city boundary to the north, and Highland Drive and 13th East was in a federal opportunity zone. It was also kind of sugar house spillover. And so that what that meant was, the development demand was incredibly high, so much so that the day I arrived in Mill Creek on October 11th, 2017, there were people waiting out the door, waiting for me to, set my coffee down and figure out where the stapler was. And I didn't even have a computer. And they wanted to talk to me about redeveloping the site. One of the first things that came up was there is a fault line. I need a variance. I had to tell them I haven't even read the code yet. This is my first day at work, but we'll figure something else out. That began a series of conversations with developers and property owners about really what this area needs to look like. And in 2018, it was dilapidated commercial, but it had the benefits that Ryan mentioned of being close to transit. It had, good bones in the sense of, good infrastructure nearby. Um, and so we started a community engagement process immediately. We immediately worked on a master plan, and by 2020, we moved really fast. We actually had a form-based code. However, plans change, right? And the master plan identified uh, an area in the middle of in the middle of the block that essentially ate the fault line setback that was required by our geologic analysis. But we also, realized that what we wanted was bigger. And what we came up with was a open space that became both the anchor and the connective tissue for this multifamily development. This resolved some of the neighborhood's concerns about not simply duplicating what they were seeing elsewhere in the region, which were big stacked flat apartment buildings with, really little in the way of community amenities that could benefit everybody. And so the image on the right, you could see our first kind of site concept plan that incorporated a much more significant public space that arose out of our community engagement process. In terms of implementing a center, you got a sense of what that means from Ryan's presentation. But here's what the world sees: they see kind of a relatively clean, linear process. But from our perspective, this was a zoning effort that touched every single process that we could possibly do under state law. But also it highlighted the limits of planning and zoning in terms of the efficacy of building centers. And that's one of the lessons that I've taken away from this process, that it really needs to be a holistic community-wide process, a community-wide effort. And it's not just a zoning problem. It is a problem requiring, coordination with multiple jurisdictions. It is a communications problem. It is a branding problem. It is a marketing problem. And to really build a good place, you need solutions to all of those various problems. This is where we are at now. And if anybody's interested after this presentation, I can share with you this document that really tells you what has happened. And we have we have over 1,400 dwellings that are entitled or under construction, 107,000 square feet of commercial space, and 2,300 parking stalls that have been planned or developed as part of this. Placemaking is really a function of planning and programming. And again, there are limits to what we can do. If you build it, they will not come, in fact. And I think we've seen that over and over again in some of our previous efforts. It really requires intentionality of how that space is used and deployed. We're really proud of Mill Creek Common, and we're really proud of what it has done for the community. It has provided a civic gathering space that Mill Creek lacked, and it responded to what the community asked us to do in the general plan. But again, it takes work. We stood up an entire city department to activate the space and to provide uh, opportunities for community events and community engagements at various scales and at various times a day. Central to Mill Creek Common is a skate loop that functions for roller skating in the summer, ice skating in the winter. And it's also designed to be a very flexible space. Those railings can be taken down. It can be used as a festival grounds when we need to, or it can also accommodate a series of smaller activities. You can see that it functions throughout the year, winter and summer, morning and night, and it's really important to have that type of accessibility throughout the day and at differing scales to really make this thing work. If your goal is to be the anchor of the center as a public space, we really need to think about how it's programmed. Here's some examples of our 4th of July event. One of the lessons learned here is that you can actually do too much in this space. Our first 4th of July event was an event, it was extremely memorable, and it's not necessarily something we want to do again. It's not necessarily the best for thousands upon thousands of people to be in Mill Creek Common. And one of the things we learned was that there is a right size for events. There are diminishing returns. And I love this. I love this day. I have no regrets, but I don't ever want to do anything like this again. It was simply too much. But you can see how magical it was at the same time. In terms of parking, to just kind of follow up with what Ryan said, parking is both an opportunity. It's a pain and it's an opportunity. In our case, you know, we created these parking reserve areas. The first one's under construction now. It's next to City Hall. We utilized a parking study that accounted for the unique mix of uses in Mill Creek Common, including City Hall, including the public gathering spaces outside, including the ice skating, some of which the ITE standards, to Ryan's point, didn't really respond well to. So we actually had our parking study analyze ULI and the International Council of Shopping Center standards to see what actually really worked. The study was particularly important because it helped inform the relationship between the city and the adjacent developer on sharing the cost of the parking structure. And in the end, we utilized that study to identify not just the appropriate parking that we needed, but how the cost of that facility in terms of construction and operations and maintenance will be shared over time. So it's really important to get that parking dialed in appropriately. Here's a more detailed version of the Mill Creek Common Master Plan. We're working on phase 2, which is in the middle of which is the heart of the project right now. We just completed we just attained a series of state and federal grants that will fund the phase 2 development, and we're excited to see it built out in the next 2 to 3 years. It will include more green space, a skate park, and a children's play area. We find that people love to be outdoors in Mill Creek, and that turns out to be the secret sauce of this project. So it's important to just not just copy what another city does, right? I've had to kind of take this lesson to other communities, and there's a desire to simply do what Mill Creek has done. I think what you need to do is identify what brings your community together, what brings your community joy. Find the right scale. I don't know that 75-foot tall buildings are appropriate for every circumstance or for every community, but it worked for us. But also find the right design elements. You could do a lot by signaling your intent by building something beautiful, and developers will follow along. That's actually one of the interesting lessons I've learned. Consider public and civic space as an anchor to bring your people together. We think of this as kind of a new idea in Utah, but it's actually a very old idea. This is how public spaces have been organized around the world, where the city hall or the public gathering space, the palace, the town hall, what have you, really becomes the organizing element of this. Planning isn't enough. It's important to program the space. And as I said, parking is a pain in the you know what, but it also is an opportunity where the city or some sort of public entity can step in, underwrite the cost of the land for the parking structure, which is the least sexy element of this, allow the developer to flourish, and they can kind of share the cost, right? We've done this once on City Hall. We're probably going to do it again on the east side of Mill Creek Common. It's really important to share that cost of that parking structure. So again, just to finish up, right? This is what what's now Mill Creek Common, what our center looked like in 2019. You can see that it was a significant amount of dilapidated, underutilized commercial and almost light industrial development. And here it is today. We're pretty proud of it. And we think that it's a really good example of how to build a center in a constrained space and to create a place using not just planning tools, but all sorts of community engagement tools and programming to deliver to the community something that the community wants. And that's particularly important to help ease the burden or ease the challenge that we face when our residents or our neighbors express concern about change. It's important to change in a way that brings something of value to the community, and we think we did that in Mill Creek Common. If you have any questions, I'll be here for the remainder of the show. But I think at this point, I'll just turn the time over to Alyssa Gamble.
Thanks, Frank. Now I get to play the game of figuring out how to share my slides. All right. Thanks, y'all. So I'm Alyssa, the Moderate Income Housing Program Manager. If you're not familiar with me, we're going to talk a little bit about the moderate income housing reporting requirements and actually what we're seeing from communities as this reporting has been required. So just to kick us off, there are so many definitions and terms associated with affordable housing. The definition that we use, this is pulled from the state statute, is housing that is occupied or reserved for occupancy by households with a gross household income equal to or less than 80% of the median gross income for households of the same size in the county in which the housing is located. It's a very long and technical definition to basically say, hey, we're going to look at your county's median income. Anyone who is earning 80 or any household earning 80% or less than that median will be considered moderate income housing. So just to kind of set the stage, that's what we're looking at today. We do have a handful of reporting elements that we have been able to evaluate and look at over the past several years. I'll briefly talk about what each one is really quickly. So cities and counties who are required to complete the moderate income housing report annually have to submit a progress update to DWS. So that will include any actions that your city or county completed in the last year. So this can range from anything like, we were researching this policy implementation, drafting an ordinance, implementing an ordinance. So if you have something in place and your community is annually, revisiting that work, that could be counted as an action. We look at any land use regulations and decisions. So if your community completed a rezone related to one of your selected strategies from the state statute, or anything was presented to your council related to one of your strategies, that would be documented in the report. Barriers. This, we're starting to get into the a lot of the more community level nuance when we hear from communities about their barriers. So a barrier would be, we got into this project and realized that, there were factors we had not previously considered, or some other barriers that we've seen from communities are really related to the uh, challenges with development right now. So I'm sure we're all very familiar with the current costs of housing in general, but also construction and installing infrastructure. All of those are items that we're seeing reported in the barriers over the last 2 years. Market responses. So once a community has started to implement their strategy, we would want to have them report back on any outcomes, outputs, any consequences from what they're seeing, right? Market response isn't always positive. So just what are the changes in your community as you're implementing this policy? This can range from anything like we've entitled X number of units, or, for example, it's a redevelopment project, perhaps there was, some relocation needs associated. There are a handful of just data points that we request. So counts on accessory dwelling units every year. So over a longer term, we'll be able to see, how many accessory dwelling units are within communities that are required to report, and what is the change overall. Maps and tables, that's actually a new addition this year. So providing the current zoning map, either in a shapefile or a PDF format is now a requirement. Again, over time, the idea would be to see that change as some of the policies are implemented, some of the strategies are implemented. Obviously, the zoning map will be much more closely related to any strategies related to your land use and zoning. Counts of entitled units. This is another new metric that was implemented this year. So communities would have seen it on their 2024 report. A count of the number of units within your community that have been entitled, but not yet have received a building permit. And then we do also request recommendations. There are often some innovative ideas in community that community members have that have not been thought of or added to the code, or are not reflected in our report. Those are so helpful to my team. So any questions or comments that you have either about the report, barriers with whether it be the code or the selection of strategies, what have you, you can definitely include those in the recommendations, and those are reported back back to us and up through my division. So something that's really exciting now that we've been in this process for a couple of years is we're able to see, start to get an initial picture on how things are actually being implemented. This is something that's been requested from a lot of different communities. And as we all know, sometimes implementation takes time. So now we're starting to see some of these initial outcomes and outputs. So I'm just going to summarize a few of them here. We have several communities that have selected strategy B, so planning for that infrastructure that would serve moderate income housing units. So how this is looking on the ground is these communities are either planning for infrastructure like water. We know that that's essential to any kind of new development, or they're looking at specific construction lines that are serving specific developments that will have moderate income housing. Some of our others are coordinating with nonprofits or housing authorities. There's actually a great example of a partnership with a housing authority that's leveraging multiple different funding sources. So the city working with the housing authority, looks at federal funds, utilizes RDA funds to help move preservation of affordable and moderate income units within their community. That has been really interesting to see that move forward. RDA funds the use of RDA funds for moderate income housing units is a very common, especially among our more urban reporting communities. So using your required redevelopment set aside to develop those moderate income housing units. Every community has a little bit of a different strategy to move those forward. So some look more at, like I said, partnering with housing authorities. Some cities have a housing acquisition program. Others are using those funds to help pay for low and moderate income students from their community to have that house to live in that housing for a certain period of time. There are a lot of very innovative ideas and uses of that set aside across reporting communities. Implementation of previously adopted policy. I know that this is a very common question that we get is how do we report on something that we've had ongoing for multiple years that's very effective within our community. That is definitely an option. You have to meet certain criteria. But we do have a handful of communities that have, for example, had like a housing grant program in place for several years, or mortgage assistance programs in place for several years. And they annually have an application process or regularly occurring administrative duties to implement the program that they're able to report on in their moderate income housing report. Accessory dwelling units, this is the most commonly selected strategy across the state. So we know there's a lot of interest here. So a ton of different methods of allowing, reducing restrictions, and then also reducing fees to try to facilitate that moderate income housing. Something we've seen with parking is, looking at development by development reductions, but we do have a couple of communities that are doing that shared parking allowances. And then there's a lot of planning associated with the station area plans, looking at planning and studies related to parking. So that is something that we anticipate seeing in coming years as the station area plans are wrapped up here in 2025. There are multiple strategies related to density and land use. So I'm not going to get too in the weeds there, but we do see a lot related, again, to the station area plans, looking at some transit-oriented development, a handful of communities reporting on upzones and overlays, and even some form-based code within mixed-use zones. I do just want to say it's interesting to see the overlap in what some communities are already using, and also some of the overlap in the toolkits put together by the speakers here today. So if these are things you have in mind, you can look at the strategies if you're a reporting community and potentially utilize those to meet the annual reporting requirements. I do just want to talk about a few toolkits and resources that we have put together. One is the Affordable Housing Dashboard. We are anticipating an update to this data by the end of the calendar year. So keep an eye out. This provides current supply needs, projected demand, along with some local demographics for any city or county that's over 5,000. Um, Most of this data is focused at rentals right now. If you do hop into the dashboard, you will see a list of for sale product from the data year, broken down by AMI, and it's quite telling to look at it and see what share of the housing sold in the last year or so would have been affordable to an 80% or below household, 80% AMI or below household. One of the other reporting and data resources that we have available is we post all of the annual reports to our website. That's a requirement for us, but it can be a very helpful tool for you if you don't have a housing element, if you currently don't have, if you don't need to complete the reporting yet. Or if you're just interested in seeing what your neighbors are doing for affordable housing, potentially generating some ideas, this can be a good resource to see what other communities are looking at and moving forward. So you can look at it either from a regional standpoint or by comparing communities of similar size. And of course, if you do have any questions, I am more than happy to hop on a call and talk through any questions you might have related to the Moderate Income Housing Report or the housing element. And I think that's it. I'll kick it over to Cody.
Hey, thanks, Alyssa. It's interesting to see what communities have decided to focus on from that menu of strategies. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And before we move on to some new water values research data, I want to mention that we just completed, last year, we completed some land use strategies to bring housing back within reach with Alyssa and her team. So you can check out that report too at this QR code. It's kind of a discouraging time to be a planner who's focused on housing affordability, just with how bad the problem's gotten. I've heard a lot of, we've tried to do the right things and build some smaller units, and they're still $600,000-$700,000, which is definitely discouraging. The good news about the strategies in this report is they are all research validated. There's an appendix in the back that has some of those empirical studies. But everything in here, we know that it works if it's implemented regionally. Housing markets are regional, and the market also takes a long time to respond. So that's kind of the caveat. But don't get too distracted by that report, because we've got lots of interesting water data to share with you today. This information is hot off the press. We just wrapped it up a month or so ago. We partnered with our longtime partners, Heart and Mind Strategies, to complete this research. Most of this information that I'll be sharing today is from an online survey that we did. It had about 800 participants from throughout Utah. It was a statistically relevant sample that was professionally selected by a survey company. And this work did build off of some earlier focus groups that we had completed to dig in a little bit deeper to how people are thinking about these water issues. A few things that I think make this information relevant to communities throughout the state are, I think some things you'll learn today are how Utahns are feeling about and what motivates them regarding water and water conservation. There's some insights in here about what language resonates with community members the most and might motivate them. I think this might be particularly relevant as cities are looking at updating their water use and preservation elements of their general plans. And then also if your city or county has existing or planned water conservation programs, policies, incentives. I think there's a lot of applications for this information. So I'm going to start out with some high level findings, and then we'll transition into a few more specific things. But overall, when we ask Utahns about what issues they feel are most important to the future, the things that consistently come out on top, I think historically throughout the years, water has always been number one. This is like the first time that housing cost of living has passed that, but water is still right up there. These are the top two issues for sure. That they beat out the economy, air quality, education, and healthcare. So these are things that people are really focused on. Looking at water again, we've got about 76% of Utahns that we surveyed were at least somewhat concerned about water in Utah. So people are paying attention to this. Um, we also asked them who has the most responsibility to address any water shortage issues that Utah may face. They definitely selected the state government as the most responsible party, but they also feel that people like them that live here in Utah also have a role to play in making sure we're managing our water wisely. And then they also think that federal and local governments have a role to play. So I'm pretty encouraged when I see this data. People are concerned, and they also think that, governments should be taking action on this, and they also are willing to pitch in. When you look at whether or not Utahns think they can make a difference, you've got less than 10% don't think they can make a difference at all. About 40% think that they can make changes, but it may or may not have a large impact. But the majority of Utahns think that the changes that they make will matter, and that we all need to do our part to manage water wisely in Utah and make sure that we continue to have a high quality of life here and secure our water future. So I think really we're in a pretty good position to make some positive changes to water use management. We also asked our participants about water allocation, if people, how much water people think goes to different sectors, as well as which sectors they think are using more water than they should. So the only thing I want to focus on this left column here is that Utahns do think that indoor residential use is higher than outdoor residential use, which is flipped. I can't remember exactly, but it's something like 2/3 of residential use, depending on the community, is outdoor use. So a little bit of a misconception there. You probably have a better sense for exactly what that breakdown is in your community. But we also, when we asked about which sectors they think use too much water, they focused on parks, sports fields, and golf courses, as well as outdoor residential uses. So they're kind of recognizing that a lot of these landscaped areas couldn't do more to conserve water. And then kind of a secondary focus here is those commercial and industrial areas. We also did some visual preference surveys of what types of landscaping Utahns prefer. And somewhat surprisingly, this kind of more water smart local scapes type landscaping on the top was the most popular option. About 69% of our participants picked this as their first or second choice out of a list of 4 different options. So some interesting things to notice here are this landscape does still have grass. It's got some nice usable recreational grass there in the middle on this top image. But it also has areas to hang out. It's got some shade. It's got some different water-wise landscaping around the edges. People, it turns out people think that looks pretty nice. They think, maybe this can save me some water on my water bill. And then the next most popular option here was a little bit more grass, but still has a lot of this local scapes, water-wise landscaping around the edges. It just has a little bit bigger patch of grass, so maybe if you're, out trying to kick the soccer ball or play catch, you've got a little bit more space on the grass to do that. We gave them an option that was just all grass backyard. It had a few trees and stuff, but nothing, none of this alternate landscaping around the edges. That was just a little bit less popular than this bottom image. People do still like that, but given the choice, they preferred these more water smart options. And then the least preferred option that we gave people was more of a desert landscaping, xeriscaped type of backyard. And people didn't like that quite as much. Something that we noticed when we were doing the survey was that people responded to these images a little bit better than they responded to just text about water-wise landscaping or localscapes. Um, so we're thinking that people maybe don't necessarily know what we mean when we're talking about those things. So these visual examples are really helpful. Some other insights we got into how people are feeling about these landscapes are that, most people aren't too concerned about water smart landscaping, but if they do have hesitations, they usually come from concerns that it might not be as good for the recreational uses that they like to enjoy in their yard. Some people were concerned that it could make their yard a little bit hotter, contribute to those heat island effects and things along those lines. And some people also mentioned that this type of landscaping might not be as good for a dog or other pets if that's a priority for you. We also asked what some things were that would make Utahns more likely to change their landscaping from grass to something that was a little bit more water smart. And the things that they mentioned most often were if they knew it was going to be affordable, if they could get upfront incentive money to help cover the costs of converting their landscape. They also suggested that they would be more likely to make changes if they knew it would continue to be attractive and provide for the recreation and lifestyle needs of their family. Making sure they can still enjoy that space obviously is a big priority for people. And they also mentioned that if they knew it would require less maintenance, that would be a plus for them. We also asked people about how they feel about different rebates. So we asked about cash rebates for the purchase and installation of smart irrigation controllers, rebates to flip their strip. So that's when you convert your park strip to different types of landscaping. That's grass that rarely gets used in most cases. So that's something that communities have been targeting. And then we also asked about cash rebates to replace some of your grass with more water-wise or water-efficient landscaping. And we found that about a third of people either have already used these rebates or definitely plan to in the future. But our biggest chunk of people here are kind of undecided. About 50% of people would consider doing so. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to make people aware of those and drive them to those opportunities to the extent that those rebates are available. I'm going to transition a little bit into some messaging insights now. One of the things that we like to ask are these word equity questions. How these questions work is we have a long list of different words and we ask people to rank if that's something that has positive equity for them, if they have a positive reception to it, or if they respond more negatively to it, then they're thought to have a negative reception. And then there are things that are in the middle that are thought to be either polarizing or just kind of more neutral. And how you use these types of insights about word equity. For example, you could talk about if you're talking to a homeowner about how they might change their landscaping, you could talk about how they could preserve their areas of recreational grass, which has a positive word equity, and talk about how in other areas where they have some useless grass or some non-functional grass, how they might replace those areas with water smart landscaping. So these are kind of words that might motivate people either positively or negatively. Some more insights here that we thought were kind of interesting were these landscaping words here towards the bottom of the page. we were a little bit surprised to find that water smart landscaping and water efficient landscaping language was viewed more positively than water wise landscaping or native landscaping, which seem like more common terms now. Those ones are still very positive, so I wouldn't necessarily discourage people from using water wise or native landscaping. But if you can talk about water smart landscaping, talk about water efficient landscaping, um, in your programs or when you're updating your general plan. Those are generally things that everyone's going to be on board with. And I think that's everything from this word equity page. I'm going to get into a few specifics on some of the specific messages that we tested. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I'll go through some of the options here. Maybe unsurprisingly, the message that would make people most likely to support water conservation efforts is this message here about saving water can help you save money. I mean, people are usually on board if they can save money. But some of these other messages here are that did really well were those about stewardship in the purple, and then about individual responsibility to conserve water in this more salmon-y color. So I'll go through a few of those specific ones. The first one here is we all need to be good stewards of this beautiful state and its resources, and that includes conserving water whenever we can. And similarly, the second one is Utah's population will nearly double by 2060, but our water supply won't. We need to conserve to make our water supply go further. And I didn't cover this before. Something that we do in these values studies is develop what we call values ladders, but basically we look at what we ask people what's important to them, and then we kind of dig in a level or two deeper on why those things are important to them. And when it comes to water conservation, people want to conserve water and are interested in the water supply because it helps to enhance and maintain the high quality of life that we have here in Utah. And I think that kind of underlying value of water, contributes to our high quality of life is reflected here in these messages. And then some of the individual responsibility messages here, we've got when individual households manage water wisely, especially outdoor water, it helps to sustain agricultural communities and local food production. That was another one of the kind of secondary values ladders that came up was people were interested in kind of supporting these agricultural communities. And a lot of the reasoning behind that was this idea of local food production, self-sustainability, those sorts of things. Both of these next messages focus on jobs and prosperity and kind of our economic future. So for example, if we all do our part to conserve water, there will be water to support jobs and prosperity. That's another thing that comes up in those values ladders as kind of a higher up level. And it's something we consistently hear that is a draw to Utah is we've got a pretty strong economy here. On these last ones, I'll just mention that this second to last one here talks about how kind of everyone is pitching in to conserve water. I think there is a little bit of a risk that, if people think that they're having to sacrifice and no one else is doing their part, that they may be less motivated to do so. But if they see that farmers are trying to be more, use water more wisely, if they see that communities are updating their requirements, things like that, then they'll be more willing to do their part. And then this last one here is about embracing water-wise landscapes, and responsible water use will ensure that we have the resources for future generations, including your grandchildren and your children and grandchildren to live here. Again, on those values ladders, that's something that is a kind of a core value of people is future generations here in Utah, tying back to those kind of family-oriented values that we have here. So I've just got one more slide here with some messages. These messages are a little bit more specific to what types of information people respond to. And we found that information that emphasizes the impact of conservation as well as messages that underline the practicality of conserving water. So we've got using native plants for most of your yard and reserving grass for the most heavily used areas can reduce your water use by as much as 2/3. People see that they can reduce their water use by 2/3 and are excited about that. You can see here the greatest impact that you make on water conservation is to remove grass that you don't use, like in park strips, excuse me. You might call that useless or underutilized grass, as we saw a few slides ago, and replace it with water efficient landscaping. So those messages emphasize impact. And then we have a few messages here about how difficult it is to use the right amount of water that people mentioned that would help them to support water conservation when they think about that. This next message here uses some specific numbers. So it suggests that a square foot of grass requires about 73 gallons of water per year to survive, where native plants can use as little as 24 gallons. I will mention that these numbers are estimates, so you might want to get something a little bit more specific if you want to use this exact structure of message. But we did test the concept and found that people responded well to it. And then this last message here, you can replace much of your grass with shrubs and other plants and still have a pleasant, cool, usable yard. Ties back to some of those things that people value about their yard, that they want. They want it to be nice out there to hang out. They want it to be cool and usable. So yeah, you might use some of these in your programming or in your general plans. I'll also mention that we are working to translate some of these findings into a little bit more of a user-friendly messaging guide. So keep an eye out for that. It should be ready within a month or so. But with that, I think you can consider yourself a graduate of this year's Quality Communities Academy. So congratulations. We do have CM credits available if you're trying to keep up on your AICP. Those were graciously provided by the American Planning Association Utah chapter. I'll leave that up for a little bit, and I think Emma already put that in the chat. But I think we've got plenty of time for Q&A here, so I'll hand off to Ari.
Thanks, guys. Great information. Reminder, everybody, put your questions in the Q&A feature, and we'll see how many we can get to. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to ask all of our panelists, how do people find the resources that we talked about today?
Great question. We're going to make it simple. We are going to obviously send out the resources we've talked about. What we also send out a link to the reporting. So if you've registered, we've got your email, and we'll make sure it hits your inbox. So hopefully that's very convenient.
Awesome. Thanks.
I'll add to that by mentioning we've got a tools page at envisionutah.org/tools. And also there's an effort to get a lot of these tools on the Land Use Academy of Utah website. That's luau.org, or maybe there might be a Utah in there or something, but you can Google Luau Utah and you should find those as well.
Cool. All right, we got a question about form-based codes. I think both Ryan and Frank mentioned a form-based code. Can you just give a little more info about what a form-based code is and why it might matter if you're planning a center?
Well, I think on a high level, a form-based code, I guess it uses the form as the primary basis of the focus instead of separating the uses in terms of the code. But Frank, you've implemented a form-based code, so maybe you can add on to the discussion here.
Hi, I've done a couple actually, Ryan, and I think So, I mean, it's really a question of emphasis. You still in the form-based code need to identify what uses you don't want, right? So, like, I mean, if we don't want a glue factory in City Hall or in the city center, we need to say so. But um, what form-based code does is really place an emphasis on how a building looks and how it connects to other buildings in terms of the right public spaces. Whereas traditional zoning is really use first, right? So it's really a question of degree rather than emphasis. Um, we found that our form-based code has been very successful. That said, we've had to amend it a couple times because there have been good ideas or projects that we didn't envision when we started this process. And an important kind of component of the form-based code concept is a willingness to, make changes to really get what you want, right?
Cool. Since we're talking on centers, I had another question about centers, and this is probably for Frank. Um, what, as you've developed out this center and the plans, what has been the role of the city versus the role of the private sector? Does the city, has it aggregated a bunch of the land? How has that worked?
Well, good question. The city actually aggregated the land underneath the fault line setback, and for City Hall. And that took money. And honestly, part of the agreement, if you will, the between the city and the developer is that they were not going to get a penny of tax incentive, right? All of the increment that was generated out of this community reinvestment area was going to be reinvested in the property acquisition and in the development of what's now Mill Creek Common. What developers get is a beautiful, highly functional, exciting, interesting place that they can put their building in front of. That helps them in two ways. It helps them to market the commercial space that we're asking for on the ground floor, and it helps them market the residential component as well. They also received a slight reduction in parking, a slight reduction in open space requirements, because we're providing some of the parking in the open space requirements. That's the developer incentive. To give them an economic development incentive on top of that would be like, having your cake and eating it too. Um, so I think that also kind of made it easier to sell to the public, right? Because we weren't saying, here you're getting all these big tall buildings, and we're also helping the developer subsidize the cost of that by writing them a check. Instead, we're able to tell the public, yes, there's, tax increment financing here, but all of that comes back to you in the form of a great public space.
Cool. Thanks. Let's turn to affordable housing now. Cody alluded to something that I hear a lot, which is, as a city, we planned for and allowed some density. Maybe we allowed some townhomes, but then they sold for $600,000, or the apartments we planned ended up being luxury apartments, and they're not really all that affordable. What would your response to somebody who said that? What would you say to them? Is that a failure? Did we not succeed?
I think it's a success, even though they're expensive, and they are admittedly expensive. New construction is often expensive, but the reality is we need more housing units, and this is a way to get more housing units in a strategic location. So, when I think of, someone had to move out of a home to move into this new home. So it's one more unit. That's how I think about it. So I do think it's a success. Admittedly, new construction is quite expensive.
What else want to weigh in on that one?
Cody, were you going to go?
Go ahead, Alyssa.
Okay. Um, yeah, I would agree with that. I think, in general, coming from the, annual moderate income housing reporting lens, a lot of these relate to the market responses that maybe we didn't intend or expect as outcomes of implementing a project, right? So, I think that there are tools at our disposal, a handful if we do if your community does really want a new 80% AMI or lower project, there are a lot more hoops you have to jump through, right? Whether that be financing hoops, regulatory hoops, zoning and land use, what have you, to develop those kinds of projects. But it is a possibility. So it does really depend on what your community's goals are, if that's an outcome you're wanting to achieve.
Anybody else? Cody?
I'm happy to add on to what Ryan and Alyssa have expertly said already. Yeah, when I think about housing affordability, I think one about the affordability of the units themselves, but also their role in kind of digging us out of the overall housing shortage. Some of that research that I referred to in my presentation was research finding that areas, kind of regions that have more restrictive development standards tend to see less housing production and have prices grow more quickly than areas that are more permissive that tend to have more units added and either have price increases moderate or in some cases decline.
Yeah, as an example of that, I'm hearing that rents in downtown Salt Lake are not just leveling off, but actually starting to come down because supply has caught up with demand in that area. So it works. I was going to ask, maybe this is a question for Cody, but on water, as you went through these value study results, were there misperceptions that you saw from the public?
Really, the main one that stands out to me is that they think that indoor water use is so high. It's really a pretty small portion, and if you're in the Great Salt Lake watershed, that water for the most part is being treated and being returned into the Great Salt Lake, where some outdoor watering is evaporating and kind of being lost to the system. But I know a lot of you have also reviewed those results. If you have anything to add.
Anyone else want to add anything? That was the one that jumped out to me at the most. People thought indoor watering was more than outdoor watering. All right. Okay, we got one here. I don't know if any of you have a good answer to this. Maybe Frank, since you have more experience on the ground than the rest of us. But somebody says they've seen a roadblock with internal ADUs where the sewer department is charging the sounds like the housing unit double because there are two units there, which makes it more expensive.
Yeah. Um, I've heard a different version of that story. Now, I mean, bear in mind, Mill Creek doesn't run its own water or sewer department. And sometimes it can be difficult to, you know, it can be difficult to align your policies and your goals with the goals of a utility company, and because they have a different fiduciary obligation, right? They have to make sure that in the case of the sewer company, it all flows downhill, right? And is safe. And so, sometimes those goals are at cross purposes with, our goals as regulators and entitlers of property to, ease the burden of affordable housing. The story that I'm hearing is kind of related. Is that in terms of like the building code and utility requirements, HVAC and utility connections, it is almost as expensive to build a new small home as it is to build a detached accessory dwelling unit.
What else want to weigh in there? All right, we got another question. The public's misconception that agricultural water consumption is not as large as it is. Is that a misconception we ought to be trying to clear up?
That's an interesting question and good catch on that slide. People people did think that agricultural water use was the largest use, but they did significantly underestimate like how large it is. Um, as we're kind of approaching this information from a lens of what we can do within our communities to conserve water. So we haven't like thought that there's too much of a need to counteract that misconception. I think we did see that people are supportive of state efforts to help agricultural water users to reduce their use. So I think see that as a positive thing, and we did have that one message about kind of everyone doing their part. So I think people do want to know that agriculture is doing their part to pitch in. But again, it's kind of a tricky question of how you approach that overall misconception.
I'll add too. We really didn't see a lot of sort of finger pointing, right? Like people weren't saying, "I'm not willing to conserve. I think ag uses so much, they should conserve," right? And maybe if you try too hard to clear up that misconception, then they start to do that, but not sure. Um, let's see. Did get a question. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this. Do we know how much water is used for recreational water, parks, golf courses? I don't know that I've ever seen a number, but Cody.
Yeah, we were just looking at statewide data for this, and I think that was kind of folded into M&I use, municipal and industrial. I didn't see a great breakout for it, but there may be on kind of a case by case, golf course by golf course basis, maybe a little bit better way of understanding that. But we don't have any great data on that in the existing slide deck.
Cool. All right, I think that's about it. And we'll give people 3 minutes of their day back. So thanks everyone. Thanks to our presenters. Did a great job. And thanks again to our sponsor, Chevron, for helping make this possible. And thanks to everyone who's attended and participated and watched for materials and recording to be sent out. So thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you.